Try a folded nib pen to really individualise your artworks for some fabulous raggedy edges, crisp sharp lines, or you can make wonderful thick chattered marks with these. Here are some examples. This is on crisp Yupo paper with ink. You can also use them with watercolours to drop colours in, make splatters, crisp edges, thick lines, thin lines. So here's the pen. It's a handcrafted pen. It's got an aluminium nib and a wooden handle, which has been hand painted. And it's got a lovely curved long edge. So it's that long edge that will give you wonderful wide marks. So if you use it with the edge at 90 degrees to the paper, you'll get really wide marks. And with using it on the tip, you'll get finer marks. So here's some Fabriano 240 gram hot pressed paper. So there you go, you've got a really sharp, crisp line. I'm using Chinese calligraphy ink. And as you see, if you can put a lot of ink or a lot of watercolour into that, you'll get really, the ink will fly off the paper and you get fabulous splatters and splashes. And if you hold it at the tip of the pen at 90 degrees to your paper, you'll get wonderful chattering going up the paper. Or if you roll it around as you're coming down, you can go between thick lines or very, very fine lines. You can just have some exquisite marks that can really individualise your work with a folded nib pen. You can buy them online. I've got them on my website for sale, or you can make your own. They're also really good for if you like doing big splatters on watercolours. I do that a lot. They're really, really good for that. You can mix the colours, but that's just using black and white. So here we'll use it on some Bao Hong 300 gram cold pressed. So a bit more ink. I've loaded up the nib with ink and I love the way it just flicks off the paper and gives you some fantastic splashes, and you're really not sure exactly what sort of marks you're going to get. They're a little bit hit and miss, but you can get wonderful raggedy edges, thick lines, or super fine wispy lines. Great for drawing, especially if you want quite an unexpected, casual, contemporary look to your drawings. You can get some wonderful marks. That's chattering there coming down the paper. Get some wonderful splatters and splashes. Because this is cold pressed, it's got a little bit of a tooth to the paper, so you are hitting the corrugations with the top of your nib pen, but you can get some very interesting marks, very fine marks, quite a bit different to the hot press paper that I used before. The edges are a little bit softer on the cold pressed to what they are on the hot pressed paper. So the next paper I'm going to use with the folded nib pen is Yupo. So Yupo paper is a plastic paper, so you'll get super fine lines on this. So really lots of lines, marks like calligraphy. So if you do calligraphy, these give you a very contemporary look to your calligraphy marks if you're writing or working with those. The chattering doesn't work quite as well because the paper's got such a tight surface, it won't skip over the page as much as it will on like a cotton paper. But you can still get some brilliant marks. So I'm just using black ink here. So you can of course use colour, but I think it's quite dramatic, the effect that it has just with black ink. So some wonderful marks. You can just really let your hair down, and you can use it with acrylic inks, watercolour paints, or watercolour inks. Just wash the nib well between switching from one medium to another, especially if you're using acrylic inks because they will dry on the pen. So there you go, you've got 3 different papers, Fabriano, with very fine lines with hot press paper, quite straight edges there. The Bao Hong cold press paper has quite a roughish surface, and you've got some gorgeous marks there that are really, really interesting. Very free and expressive, I think. And the little edges there where the splatters are more pronounced on the rougher paper. And here we've got the very crisp calligraphic lines on the Bao Hong, the Yupo paper. So there you go, have some fun. Try a folded nib pen. And now we're going to go on to doing some marks with different colours. They're also great for leaves. You can get wonderful leaf shapes so easily. I'd forgotten to do them before. But yes, if you want to do some leaves, they work out really, really easy to do, and you get beautiful marks. I'm going mad here. I might try another one on the Fabriano paper. Depending whereabouts your blade touches the paper, whether it's the flatter, wider end or the tip, you get very different marks. And of course, if you want to exaggerate the turnbacks on leaves or petals, you can always go over with a second layer once it's dry. So I really like those marks there. Give them the big tick. And we'll try it on that paper. See, it's got raggedy surface to the paper, so you get the raggedy edges, which, depending on the type of work you're doing, can be really interesting. Okay, so here are some marks on hot pressed paper. Up the top I have wet one half of the paper, and I've just drawn the pen straight across, and you can see how it's bloomed into the wet paper and the wet pigment below. For this line here, I've just put water down first, and then I've just dropped the pigment in. So more water. I'm using Holbein watercolours, which I've mixed up into my little bowls, and I've made it really, really strong. If you've got really strong pigment, you can always water it down for making it less bold, less marks, a lot paler. But if you start with it really pale, you can't, it's very hard to sort of go from there. So mix up really strong pigment. So I've got a mixture. The blue is Ultramarine and Prussian blue, and the red is Quinacridone red and rose madder, and the yellow is a mixture of Quinacridone gold and Aureolin yellow. They're all transparent colours and all very strong, really bold pigments. So if you add just water to your marks, you can then come along and drop more pigment in and drag it out with the pen, add squiggly marks. You can add some splatters, some stamens to this mythical looking flower. Put some splatters on. And when it all merges on the paper, I've always loved that look. You can get fantastic marks. So just, here I'm going to do some nasturtium leaves. Very, very simple. I have done a series of artworks previously using this pen, and they just work beautifully for nasturtiums because they've got those very flat leaves that sort of can either look like a saucer or they can look like the blade of a knife. They are quite thin if you see them side on. So again, really strong pigment. And just you can draw with your pen, just try doodling around, have some fun, see what marks you can make. And because you're having fun, there's no right or wrong way to do this, it's just your way, and see how you go, have fun. Oops, just about lost the lot there. So just dropping some more yellow in, and you'll see at the end of the video what these look like when they've dried. So a bit of red, a bit of yellow, and that paper, oops, that's still very wet, never mind. It's ballooned up into the damp paper up above it. So you can just, do a fantasy flower, drop some blue in to darken up the stem. Just drying the pen off there well. The little block on the right is actually part of a car wash sponge. It's a very, very dense foam and makes a fantastic tool to have to dry your brushes and your nib pen on. You can also use your pen for calligraphy if you do calligraphy. My handwriting's terrible, but I have seen people with the most exquisite handwriting use these really, really well, and you can do quirky lettering. You might want to add that to a painting. So here's some examples of just quick foliage and flowers that I've done. A lot of them have got other colours dropped in while they were still wet. So the purpley blues on the left, I've just dropped some red in on top of those, going across to the right hand side. So while your paint is still wet, have a go, drop another colour in. If you don't like it, it doesn't really matter. Just have some fun and see what you can design, what you can produce using your marks with your pens. You certainly get a lovely diverse range of marks. If you want to make them softer, like I have at the top left-hand corner of the page, just dampen your paper before you drag your pen through, and the pigment will balloon out onto your paper. The same as when you're doing a painting in watercolour. You get lovely soft edges. So I think the combination of soft and hard edges always looks really interesting. So there's some more coming up here. So this is just to recap. That's the Bao Hong cold press paper with the nib pen. Just showing the range of marks there that you can produce. Splatters, thick raggedy edges, broad strokes, super fine lines, zigzag shapes, splatters, all sorts of things. It's a great tool to have in your art collection. There should be some more coming up in just a moment. The image on the Yupo paper. So I hope you've enjoyed watching it. You can always drop a note at the end. And here we've got the marks that are easier to see now. They're in a bigger format. These were the marks on the Yupo paper, and they've dried, so you can see the variation in tones, which also makes it more interesting. So thanks for watching. Have fun and keep experimenting, and let me know what you think.